Hello and welcome to today's lesson on FIS Binary. In today's lesson, we are going to be discussing the various types of market analysis in binary options. Now, we have two types of market analysis, that is the fundamental analysis and the technical analysis, or what is sometimes referred to by some trading analysts as the price action analysis. Alright, now we are going to be talking about the fundamental analysis. I know it's a whole lot on your screen right now, but I'm going to take my time and take it one after the other so that in case you cannot clearly read or see through, you will get to at least know what each of the points mean. Okay, so we'll be taking it one after the other. Now, fundamental analysis implies that you take trading decisions based on news release outcomes, breaking news, for instance, or news releases on currencies, or news releases on commodities. All right, now depending on the type of news and its effect on the particular type of market under which you are analyzing an asset under. All right, now good news in the case of the stocks and indices markets implies a future rise in price. Now, if there's good news, for instance, in a stock, for instance, Apple, all right? Now, that implies that there's going to be a future rise in price. For instance, assuming Apple creates a new invention or a new type of phone, which can, for instance, do something that the other phones in the system cannot do. With that type of innovation and technology, I mean, they are obviously going to take over the market. So now this is a good news. So it's going to drive the price of the stock of Apple to move higher. All right. Now, in case there's a bad news in terms of the stocks and indices markets, it causes the price to fall. For instance, assuming Apple, all right, now comes out with a product, but after a review by analysts, they do conclude that this product is not good enough. It is the worst of its kind that they've ever produced. Now, this is going to cause the stocks of, or the stock price of Apple to fall. So if you are a trading analyst and you are trading fundamental analysis, now what you do is when you get these news releases, now depending on whether it's good or bad, if it's good, you know the price is going to rise. End up taking a call. All right. Now, if the news release is bad, and you're dealing with stocks and indices, trading an asset under any of these markets, you know the news is bad, you end up taking a put because you're expecting the future price of the assets to fall. All right. Now, good news in the case of commodities implies a future fall in price. Now, for instance, if you are trading a commodity like, let's say, oil. All right. Now, assuming a country like, let's say, Ghana, right, discovers oil, and here's the case: Ghana is going to contribute, let's assume, 5 million barrels of oil every day onto the market. Now, with the current price of the oil in the market is based on the current production level. Now, with Ghana discovering oil and now producing oil, is going to cause the supply of barrels of oil per day to increase. Now, holding demand constant, all right, and in basic economics, when supply outstrips demand, it causes prices to fall. So good news in the case of commodities, which is in this case good news in terms of Ghana discovered oil and is now adding 5 million barrels of oil per day to the oil stock, the world oil stock, is good news. All right, but it will imply a future fall in price because supply will outstrip demand. All right. Now, in the case of bad news, in the case of commodities, will imply a future rise in price. For instance, let's assume one of the oil giants, like for instance, let's take Iraq. For instance, some call it Iraq. Anyways, whichever one you want to call it. Now, Iraq is known to be an oil giant. Assuming that they have a particular refinery or oil field producing or contributing 20 million barrels of oil per day to the world stock. All right, and for instance, there is a war in that particular oil field, and that oil field gets bombed up. All right, that implies that now that's 20 million barrels of oil that gets supplied onto the world stock of oil per day is gonna be cut. All right, now that implies a shortfall in the supply of oil. Now that is bad news because there's war in Iraq. That oil field has been bombed up, all right, which implies bad news. Now this is going to cause the price of oil to rise. Why? Because there's going to be a shortage in the overall stock of oil by 20 million for the next subsequent days. Now in basic economics, when demand outstrips supply, it causes prices of assets or prices of commodities to rise. All right, so in this case, a bad news with respect to a commodity will cause the price of the commodity to rise. All right, now in the case of currencies, a good news in the case of currencies, that is, if the currency in question is the denominator, implies a future fall in price. For instance, if you're having the euro USD, now you should know that it is a fraction. All right, the euro is the numerator and the USD the denominator. Now assuming there is a news release on the USD, which is the denominator in the case of the euro USD, and the news is good, which implies that the value of the euro of the USD is gonna strengthen. So for instance, let's assume the euro is 10 and the USD is 5. Now that means that the euro USD is going to be equal to 2. All right, now let's assume there's good news in case of the USD, which is the denominator, and holding the euro value constant. All right, that implies that, let's assume the USD, due to the good news, moves from 5 to 10. All right, now that implies that the euro is 10, the USD is 10. Now that will give you what? 1. So meaning that good news in the case of the USD, which is the denominator, will cause the price of the overall currency pair, which is the euro USD, to drop from 2 to 1. All right, so that will imply a fall in price. That's why we say good news in the case of currencies. That is, if the currency in question, the denominator, implies a future fall in price. Now, good news in the case of currencies, that is, if the currency in question is the numerator, all right, implies a future rise in price. Now the same logic applies. Here, assuming is the same euro USD we're using, and now the USD is keep holding USD constant at the euro is 10, the USD is 5, and holding the USD constant. Now this implies that it's going to give us 2 in the first case. Now it is good news for the euro, which is the numerator, all right, and it shoots from 10 to 20, still holding the USD constant at 5. That means that we are going to get 4. So meaning that the price is going to move from 2 to 4. That's why we imply that good news in the case of currencies, that is, if the currency in question is a denominator, implies a future fall in price. Now the same applies for the bad news, which is the opposite as well. When there's bad news in the currency in question, all right, and in the denominator, we expect a future rise in price. And if there's bad news in the case of currencies and the currency in question is the numerator, we expect a future fall in price. Now the next we're talking about is the technical analysis. Now the technical analysis is usually referred to as the price action analysis. Now this involves the use of asset charts, all right, in order to make determination of the future prices or direction of price. Now we use charts in determining the future price and direction of price of an asset. All right, now this involves the use of trading indicators such as the moving averages, the MACDs, the parabolic SARs, the Williams percentage range, and all the others. All right, or percent range and all that. Now this involves the use of trading indicators to help perform analysis. All right, and you can also use technical candlestick patterns as well in performing technical analysis. All right, which will be discussed later on in this training session. Now with that said, we are going to answer a critical question that most analysts do ask a lot, is which of these two analyses is the best. All right, in my opinion, it will depend on your trading strategy. All right, some perform very well based on just fundamental analysis, listening to the news releases and taking trading decisions, and they make a lot of money with it. Others perform technical analysis to the best of their ability and they make a lot of money with it. All right, in my opinion, I know, and as I've been doing, and I will recommend to you, is best to combine both. As at times you could perform a technical analysis and it could tell you that the asset is going to rise, so choose a call, right? But you will hear a fundamental news release that is going to tell you that no, this is bad news or this is good news, which is going to cause the price of the asset to move in the opposite direction. All right, so it becomes a bit confusing when it conflicts with each other. All right, so it's best to combine both so that in case it conflicts with each other, you do not take a trade. But if it both agrees or they both agree with each other, you then take a trade. And with some trading strategies as well, you will have to avoid news releases. So if you get to know when the news should be released, you just avoid trading. With other trading strategies, you only trade based on news releases, and when the news gets released, you do take a trade by combining both the technical and fundamental analysis. So it's best to combine both, and that's what I will recommend. All right, I hope you learned a lot from today's lesson as well. I will see you again in the next lesson. Till we meet again, I'll say take care and have a nice day.